Game of Thrones, a show that completely changed the way people looked at TV. When its first season premiered in 2011, it quickly became the most popular series of its time. People couldn't stop talking about it. And the biggest reason? Ned Stark's death in Season 1. Most shows hesitate to kill off their main characters, even in the finale of the whole show. But Game of Thrones didn't hold back. It took out its most crucial character in Season 1. Watching Game of Thrones every year wasn't just like watching a TV show. It felt like experiencing a mega event. The hype for each episode was on another level. The story actually began in 1996, when writer George R.R. Martin released A Game of Thrones, the first book in his fantasy series. It gained popularity within the fantasy community, but Martin never imagined that his story would go on to become one of the most popular of all time. With each amazing season, the show's popularity only kept growing. Seasons 1 to 4 are often considered the peak of TV history. Although there was some decline in quality after Season 4, the show's popularity never faded. It only got bigger. But Game of Thrones wasn't just popular. Plenty of movies and shows are popular. But being the best show of all time? That's a whole different level. Despite the quality downgrade in Seasons 5, 6, and 7, when people were asked about the best show of all time, they didn't even consider other shows like Breaking Bad. And it felt like Season 8, the final season, would only cement Game of Thrones' legacy even further. But, well, the opposite happened. The final season turned out to be an absolute disaster. While the first 7 seasons consistently had 90+ average ratings, Season 8 crashed below 40%. In just a month, the entire image of Game of Thrones changed. What was once called the greatest show of all time was now labeled the worst ending in TV history. Now, new audiences might not feel it as much since they binged all the seasons together, but we can't even begin to imagine the frustration of fans who waited 2 years for this season. Theories were built, expectations were sky high, and then this happened. But how did it all go so wrong? How did a show at the peak of its popularity fall apart this badly? How did the best show ever end up with the worst ending ever? And how did the two showrunners, once behind the biggest series in TV history, become the ultimate villains and the dumbest showrunners in the eyes of fans? Let's go back to where it all began. So my name is Taneem, and you're watching another video of Movie Mind 17. In 1996, when George R.R. Martin wrote A Game of Thrones, he continued the book series with A Clash of Kings, A Storm of Swords, and A Feast for Crows. These books allowed readers to dive deeper into the world of Westeros and its characters. Even before the TV show premiered, this story had already become massively popular, selling nearly 90 million copies worldwide. Martin's incredible imagination earned him numerous awards and nominations. As his popularity grew, many film studios wanted to bring his story to the big screen, but Martin rejected all offers. He believed his story was too vast and complex to be crammed into a single movie. Plus, a high-budget film would likely get a PG-13 rating, which wouldn't do justice to the mature themes of his books. Then, in 2006, everything was about to change. David Benioff and D.B. Weiss approached Martin with an offer to turn his book series into a TV show. Martin saw their passion for the story, but before giving them the rights, he decided to test them. He asked one crucial question: who is Jon Snow's mother? At the time, this was one of the biggest fan theories in the book community. When they answered correctly, Martin knew they truly understood his world. Benioff and Weiss then pitched the show to HBO, not as a high-budget CGI spectacle, but as a family drama with deep political intrigue. What impressed HBO the most was that no character was safe, especially the fact that the main hero, Ned Stark, dies in the very first season. This was the golden era of TV, with shows like The Wire, The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, and Mad Men proving that television could tell epic stories and achieve massive success. At the time, HBO was developing 10 pilot episodes but was thinking to greenlight only 5. In 2009, Game of Thrones shot its pilot episode, but no one expected it to be a complete disaster. Benioff and Weiss were totally unprepared for a production of this huge scale. The actors seemed uninterested, and the story was too confusing. In fact, early screeners couldn't even tell that Cersei and Jaime were siblings. Realizing their mistakes, Benioff and Weiss explained every scene to HBO, pointing out what went wrong and how they planned to fix it. HBO took a huge risk. They ordered 10 full episodes, including a complete reshoot of the pilot. This time, they learned from their mistakes and made significant changes. Like director Tom McCarthy was replaced with HBO's experienced director Tim Van Patten. Several actors were also recast, like Jennifer Eel, who originally played Catelyn Stark, was replaced by Michelle Fairley. Similarly, Tamsin Merchant, who was set to play Daenerys Targaryen, was replaced by Emilia Clarke, whose incredible performance later became iconic for the character. With these changes, filming resumed, and on April 17, 2011, Game of Thrones premiered, and no one could have predicted that this show would go on to make history. Game of Thrones. Season 1 was a masterpiece in every way. The reshot pilot episode was a massive improvement over the original, making character relationships and the overall story much clearer for the audience. More importantly, it successfully established the stakes of the show. The directors captured the depth of Westeros beautifully. Although the pilot didn't attract as many viewers as HBO had hoped, they still quickly greenlit a second season. But what made Season 1 so exceptional? Some might argue that having the books as a guide made it easy, but adapting a book is never that simple. If it were, every great book adaptation would be flawless, which we know is rarely the case. But we can admit that George R.R. Martin's deep and complex character writing made these characters feel incredibly real. But after Season 7, the show began a steep decline. Many dismiss this by saying, the writing was good before and bad later, but there's more to it. Season 1 had a massive responsibility, like introducing the world of Game of Thrones, showcasing different regions, cities, and houses, developing over 70 characters, establishing relationships between them, foreshadowing future events, and setting up the main conflicts of the series. For any show, handling this much in a debut season is a huge challenge. Most shows focus on just a few characters in the beginning, but Game of Thrones had to manage a vast and intricate world from the start. Yet, they handled this massive challenge brilliantly. Just like how Ned Stark was investigating House Baratheon's lineage, this is efficient storytelling at its best. That scene does two things at once. It pushes Ned's plot forward, while also giving us exposition about the noble houses of Westeros. Small details like these make the show so engaging. Another great example is Arya's sword instructor, Syrio Forel, who comes from Braavos. Through his training, we get insights into Braavosi culture, which later plays a major role in Arya's journey. These layered storytelling choices are what makes Season 1 so immersive. At its core, Season 1 is structured like a detective story. We follow Ned Stark as he unravels the mystery behind Jon Arryn's death. This murder mystery framework pulls the audience into the world naturally. It helps manage the show's complex plot while keeping the intrigue high. Now, if we talk about pacing, Season 1 is slower compared to other seasons, but that's actually a strength. It allows for smooth world building, unfolds the Jon Arryn murder mystery in a natural way, and gives more time to details, which increases the show's rewatchability. That's why this season feels so deep and well-crafted. Season 1 took its time establishing characters and the world. Every scene and every line of dialogue had a purpose, making each character's personality and goals clear from the start. Ned Stark was shown as honorable and just. Robert Baratheon, despite being king, was a drunk and somewhat reckless. Cersei Lannister was queen, but her marriage with Robert was falling apart. The character development in the first season was phenomenal. Take the opening execution scene with Ned. It wasn't just about showing his duty, it established multiple characters at once. This level of storytelling made Game of Thrones Season 1 a masterclass in setup and payoff. The travel in this season also feels logical. While characters in later seasons practically feels like teleporting across Westeros, here, long journeys serve as opportunities for character development, making the world feel much more real.
Take me to your crypt. I want to pay my respects.
We've been riding for a month, my love. Surely the dead can wait.
We've been riding for a month, my love. Surely the dead can wait.
Season 1's efficient storytelling, mystery-driven structure, slow but detailed pacing, and strong character development make it one of Game of Thrones' best seasons. Where later seasons rush their storylines, Season 1 took its time, elevating its storytelling to the next level. That's why this season stands out as truly great. In Game of Thrones, cripples and bastards are treated terribly, which makes us empathize with these characters. Take Jon Snow. He's the illegitimate son of Ned Stark. Despite being raised in Winterfell, he has no claim to land or title simply because he isn't Lady Stark's son. Then there's Tyrion Lannister, a dwarf. Even though he's the son of the powerful Tywin Lannister, he's despised and mocked by nearly everyone, including his own father and sister. In the books, Tyrion is described as extremely ugly, but the show cast Peter Dinklage, who, despite being a dwarf, is quite good-looking. And honestly, that was the right decision, because Peter Dinklage was absolutely perfect for the role. Then there's Daenerys, one of the show's central female characters. If you're a woman in the world of Game of Thrones, you're almost always seen as inferior. Women are either used for sex, married off to strengthen alliances, or simply deemed worthless. Arya Stark, for example, dreams of becoming a warrior, but is constantly told she can't, simply because she's a girl. This reflects real-world history, which is why we connect so deeply with these stories and characters. Game of Thrones never lets you feel comfortable, but because so much of its world is inspired by real life, it feels strangely relatable. Westeros is a brutal place, filled with ruthless violence, deadly diseases, widespread sexual assault, and horrific deaths. Yet, it's this realism, combined with its deep history and complex world building, that completely drew people into it. Have you ever wondered why some franchises become so popular that they turn into a culture of their own? The answer often lies beyond just the main story. Star Wars isn't just about 9 movies. It includes 2 spin-off films, multiple TV shows, animated series, video games, hundreds of books and comics, and thousands of years of lore waiting to be explored. The same applies to Marvel, DC, Harry Potter, Avatar, The Last Airbender, and Game of Thrones. When you watch Game of Thrones Season 1, you don't just get invested in the main plot. You become curious about the world itself. From Aegon's conquest to Robert's rebellion, fans want to know every detail, and luckily, all of this history is available online. HBO handled this brilliantly. With every season, they released narrated lore videos featuring the actors themselves, letting fans dive deeper into Westeros. Want to learn about the Lannister family's history from Tywin himself in just 30 minutes? Done. Want to pick your favorite house, fly its banner, and feel like a part of Westeros? Easy. This is how casual fans turn into super fans. And Game of Thrones wasn't just about world building and characters, it had some of the best dialogue in TV history. Most of the credit goes to George R.R. Martin, since many of the iconic lines were taken directly from his novels. But even beyond that, the show had original scenes, like the intense conversation between Tywin and Jaime, that weren't in the books, yet felt so captivating and character-driven that you couldn't help but admire them. One of the biggest strengths of Game of Thrones was its masterful use of exposition. Writing good exposition is tricky. You need to inform the audience about the world's history, but if you do it too directly, the dialogue feels forced and unnatural. Game of Thrones handled this so organically that it never felt like characters were dumping information just for the sake of it. Now, if I start talking about every detail of Season 1, this discussion could go on for hours. But there's one scene that truly changed the way people watch TV forever. One of the most iconic death scenes in television history. Ned Stark's execution. Killing off your main character is almost unheard of in most stories. But Ned's death wasn't just shocking because he was the lead. It was how he died and the massive impact it had on the story that made it unforgettable. Ned Stark was the heart of Season 1. The story moved forward through his perspective, and the audience saw most events unfold through his eyes. He was a truly honorable man, loyal to his family, respectful to everyone regardless of status, and always striving to do the right thing. It would have been easy to frame his death as a heroic sacrifice, but Game of Thrones did something far more brutal. Ned tried to do the right thing, to ensure the Iron Throne went to its rightful heir. But his honor was exploited. He was falsely accused of treason, forced to confess under duress, and ultimately executed in front of his own daughters. This moment cemented 2 key themes of the show. Being honorable doesn't guarantee survival. In Westeros, good people rarely win. The most cunning and ruthless individuals are the ones who thrive. And second, no character is safe. One minute, you're enjoying a heartfelt moment with your favorite character, and the next, they're gone. This unpredictability made Game of Thrones truly special. The second big lesson we get from Ned Stark's death is just as important as the first. Every action has consequences. In this world, characters can't escape the results of their decisions. If they do something foolish, they will pay for it. For example, if you threaten a fighter who casually kills people for fun, he won't hesitate to kill you. If Ned Stark had been walking down the street and suddenly got shot with an arrow, it would have been shocking, but it wouldn't have had any impact. In Ned's case, his downfall was caused by his own honor. What happens if you tell the Queen of Westeros that you plan to arrest her and her children unless they leave the throne in the city? Well, she'll use that information to protect herself. What happens if you tell a selfish and highly manipulative man that you won't act in his best interest? Well, he'll betray you. Ned Stark made choices that were honorable, but in a world like Westeros, those choices became his greatest weakness. His honesty led to his downfall, as he was falsely accused and executed. Game of Thrones stands out because every action has consequences, making its story feel incredibly realistic and believable. This wasn't like other shows where the world is ending, but none of the main characters ever die. Game of Thrones was the complete opposite, and Ned Stark's death made it clear that no one was safe. Season 1 did have some action, but its primary focus was politics. While Jon Snow's story unfolded in the north and Daenerys' journey continued in the east, the central plot revolved around Ned Stark and King's Landing. One of the best things about Game of Thrones is that it didn't immediately jump into war. Instead, it spent an entire season carefully developing its characters, their motivations, and their personal stories. Only then did it lead into a full-scale war. Season 1 was a masterpiece in many ways, but could this level of excellence continue? We've seen plenty of shows that start strong but decline after the first season. The real question now was, would Game of Thrones suffer the same fate? Now, let's talk about Game of Thrones Season 2. But this time, I'll focus on the unique aspects that set this season apart from the rest. Of course, the writing, acting, and direction are top-notch, but I want to highlight the elements that make this season truly special. Season 2 is filled with scenes that are purely character-driven. Usually, dialogue-heavy scenes serve to advance the plot. But here, many scenes revolve around characters simply talking, sharing their motivations, desires, and backstories. And I think the biggest strength of this season is its casual yet deeply engaging dialogue writing. These conversations aren't just interesting, they're so detailed and well-crafted that they're a joy to listen to. Every line is written so intelligently that you want to hear it again and again. George R.R. Martin's dialogue is so sharp that even a simple conversation feels entertaining. In Season 2, no dialogue ever feels boring, because every character is so complex that there's always something new to learn from their interactions. One of the best dialogue-driven exchanges in this season is between Tyrion and Cersei. While their conversations don't always push the plot forward, they offer deep insights into their backstories and the complexities of their relationship. Cersei despises Tyrion because she blames him for their mother's death. At the same time, she carries guilt over her own sins, her relationship with Jaime, and Joffrey's cruelty. When they talk, their words are sharp and venomous, but there's also an underlying emotional depth. Their relationship isn't just flat-out hatred. In a strange way, they depend on each other. No matter how much she despises him, Tyrion is one of the few people to whom Cersei can actually express her inner thoughts. This makes Cersei's character even more layered. Most of the time, she keeps her emotions hidden behind a cold, ruthless exterior. But in rare moments with Tyrion, she lets her guard down, revealing a more vulnerable side. And that's what makes these interactions a masterpiece. After Tyrion and Cersei, if any duo brought Season 2 to life, it was Tywin and Arya. Their conversations carried a unique intensity and chemistry. Arya's intelligence far exceeds her age, allowing her to hold her own against Tywin in a way that's incredibly satisfying to watch. Whenever she impresses Tywin, those moments feel rewarding. Tywin, despite being one of the show's biggest villains, the man responsible for destroying Arya's family, treats her almost like a daughter during their interactions. Arya's sharp wit combined with Tywin's cunning nature makes their scenes truly exceptional. These dialogue-driven moments are what set Game of Thrones apart from other shows, keeping it engaging without needing action. This proves that when you strip away exterior conflicts and focus solely on character interactions, the depth of Game of Thrones truly shines. But when David Benioff and D.B. Weiss tried to recreate this magic in Season 7 by bringing Tyrion and Cersei together again, they completely failed. That scene felt artificial and awkward, lacking the depth of their earlier exchanges. We probably didn't realize the true value of Season 2's dialogue scenes at the time because later seasons replaced them with action. And while action is easier to write, crafting powerful dialogue is far more challenging. But Season 2 excelled in this. Its dialogues were so tension-filled that they made every scene intense even without combat. This was especially true whenever Tyrion was in the room, because you never knew who was trustworthy and who was plotting betrayal. And that's the real secret behind George R.R. Martin's dialogue. It's not just intelligent, but filled with deep-rooted conflict. Whether it's Cersei secretly scheming against Tyrion, Littlefinger switching alliances, or Varys hiding his true plans behind a smile, every conversation was a mind game. In Season 1, we saw Ned Stark as an honorable man who didn't understand politics, which ultimately led to his downfall. But in Season 2, we follow Tyrion, a man who knows how to play the Game of Thrones. After Ned's execution, it became clear that everyone in King's Landing was dangerous. But in Season 2, Tyrion had mastered the game. He is one of the reasons why every dialogue in this season was so entertaining. He strategically tested loyalty by telling 3 different people 3 different stories to see who would leak information to Cersei. He exiled Janos Slynt from King's Landing for betraying Ned Stark. He blackmailed Lancel Lannister over his affair with Cersei. All of this made Tyrion the mastermind of Season 2, and every victory of his was deeply satisfying to watch. But Season 2 isn't just a masterclass in intelligent writing and political mind games, it's proof of how dialogues alone can create tension and suspense. Every conversation had an underlying sense of danger. Cersei was secretly plotting to take down Tyrion. Littlefinger was loyal to no one. Even Varys' alliances were never straightforward. Pycelle was completely under Cersei's control. Every line felt like a ticking time bomb, and the audience never knew when the next explosion would happen. That was the true magic of Game of Thrones, a magic the show's later seasons lost. Season 2 is not just an example of brilliant dialogues and character interactions. It proves that a show doesn't need constant action to be thrilling. All it needs is powerful dialogue. Now let's talk about Season 2's most intense action sequence, Blackwater. The Battle of Blackwater was easily one of my favorite parts of the season. How often do we get a fantasy battle where the lines between good and evil are blurred? Sure, the Lannisters had villains like Joffrey and Cersei, but they also had someone like Tyrion, whom we actually root for. On the other side, Stannis Baratheon was a skilled battle commander, but not exactly a noble hero. Yet he had Ser Davos, a genuinely good man. In Season 1, the divide between good and bad was clearer, but later seasons changed that. Yes, the Starks were generally the good side, and the Lannisters the bad side, but it wasn't always that simple. Tyrion Lannister was proof that even among the so-called villains, there were characters worth caring about. Despite being on the wrong side, we wanted him to succeed. Blackwater isn't just one of Game of Thrones' best episodes, it's also considered one of the greatest battle episodes in television history. What makes it special is that it stays focused on one location, without cutting to other storylines. This keeps the immersion at its peak. But what truly sets this episode apart is how it builds tension before diving into action. We see Stannis' fleet approaching, and different characters react in their own ways, like Stannis, who is calm and confident, knowing this is his moment. Davos, who is nervous but fully committed to his king. Tyrion, who is underdog in this battle, aware of the odds but mentally preparing. Cersei, who is already drunk, acting like she doesn't care. This slow tension building makes the eventual battle even more impactful. And then comes the wildfire trap. The execution of this was absolute perfection. As Stannis' fleet gets closer, Davos slowly realizes something is wrong. And then, boom! That horrifying green explosion, fire spreading everywhere, soldiers screaming as they burn alive. This scene is as spectacular as it is terrifying. It adds an entirely new level of tension and intensity to the battle. But Blackwater isn't just about stunning visuals. It also tells a perfectly crafted story through the battle. Tyrion, who is always the sarcastic observer, proves himself as a true leader for the first time. He takes responsibility, rallies the soldiers, while Joffrey, the actual king, runs away in fear. The Hound, a warrior who never fears anything, completely breaks down at the sight of fire and abandons the fight. Cersei, observing the battle from the Red Keep, treats it like a game but is secretly terrified of losing. She even prepares for the worst, leading to her interesting conversation with Sansa. And then comes the most legendary moment of the battle, Tyrion's iconic speech.
Those are brave men knocking at our door. Let's go kill them!
Even today, it gives goosebumps. Tyrion, who was always treated as a joke, emerges as the real leader of this battle. On the other side, Stannis, despite seeing his men burn, keeps fighting like a true commander until the end. This battle isn't just about action, it's about who can handle extreme pressure and who crumbles under it. Every scene screams that Game of Thrones' true strength lies in its characters and their development. That's why Blackwater isn't just one of the best episodes of Season 2, but one of the greatest episodes in the entire show. After the explosive action of Blackwater, it's time for the final episode of Game of Thrones Season 2, Valar Morghulis. This episode doesn't just show the aftermath of the battle, but also sets up Season 3 perfectly. The most emotional moment of the episode is Tyrion's condition. Tyrion, who risked everything to save King's Landing, wakes up to find that despite his efforts, he receives no recognition. Instead, he is sidelined like a wounded nobody. He was the real reason they won the battle, yet all the credit goes to Tywin. And what does Tyrion get? No respect, no honor. Tyrion realizes that no matter what he does, his family will always see him as worthless. Meanwhile, Tywin makes his grand entrance into the throne room like a hero, and the entire court credits him with saving King's Landing. This one scene makes it clear that politics in King's Landing is just as toxic as ever, where power matters more than actual efforts. For Sansa, this moment brings a false sense of hope. Joffrey announces his engagement to Margaery, making Sansa believe that she is finally free from this nightmare of a marriage. But then comes Littlefinger, reminding her that she is still in danger. This is the beginning of Littlefinger's manipulation of Sansa, which will later become one of the most dangerous things to ever happen to her. In Season 2, Daenerys' court storyline was the weakest part. mainly because it dragged on too long. But its finale was absolutely epic. Inside of the House of the Undying, she sees visions, including Iron Throne in the ruined King's Landing, foreshadowing the future of King's Landing. And then comes her best moment, when she burns that magician alive to reclaim her dragons. Jon's story this season focuses more on setup than complexity, but his most crucial moment comes in this episode. The wildlings have captured him, and now he must earn their trust. He is forced to kill Qhorin Halfhand, one of the hardest decisions he's ever made. This moment pushes Jon out of his black and white worldview and into a gray area, where sometimes survival means making morally difficult choices. In the final moments of Season 2, Arya receives a mysterious lesson from Jaqen H'ghar, and for the first time she hears the words, Valar Morghulis. This scene not only kickstarts Arya's journey, but also introduces the audience to the mystery of the Faceless Men, setting up an even more exciting arc in Season 3. At this point, the Lannisters have won, at least for now, but their enemies are regrouping, proving that the War of the Five Kings is far from over. While the others were caught up in Blackwater, Robb Stark was declared king in the north and was winning battles one after another. But in politics, power isn't everything. Relationships matter too. And this is where Robb follows his heart, which changed his fate forever. Robb had promised House Frey that he would marry one of their daughters to secure their alliance. But instead, he breaks that promise and marries Talisa. It feels like an emotional and romantic moment, and this couple became one of my favorites. But in Game of Thrones, every action has consequences, and this decision leads to one of the most heartbreaking moments in the entire series, which unfolds in Season 3. Meanwhile, Catelyn Stark, who has been Robb's closest advisor, makes a desperate mother's decision. She secretly frees Jaime Lannister, hoping to get Sansa and Arya back. This infuriates Robb, causing her to lose her position by his side. But in her mind, she did it for her children. Robb put love above duty, while Catelyn put her motherly instincts above politics. But in Game of Thrones, every action has a price, and their fate is sealed in Season 3. Looking at the entire season, it does a brilliant job of building on Season 1's setup. With Tyrion's moments, the Battle of Blackwater, and King's Landing's brutal politics, Season 2 stands as one of the best seasons of Game of Thrones. Now, let's talk about Season 3. As always, the writing, direction, acting, and production were top-notch, but I'll focus on the unique elements that make Season 3 special. Throughout the show, there's political backstabbing and strategic gameplay, which many fans love because it brings out the best in George R.R. Martin's writing. But for the first time, politics itself becomes the main driving force in Season 3. For example, Season 1 was a murder mystery. Season 2 was an underdog battle story. But Season 3 is all about political mind games and power struggles. One common theme among almost every Game of Thrones character is loyalty to their house. The Lannisters keep Sansa Stark as a hostage, while the Starks hold Jaime Lannister captive. The Tyrells originally supported Renly Baratheon, but after his death, they ally with the Lannisters to strengthen their power by marrying Margaery to King Joffrey. Tywin forces Tyrion to marry Sansa, hoping to secure control over the North. Every single move in this power game matters. Every character is a player in this Game of Thrones. In King's Landing, the Lannisters versus Tyrells conflict is unique because it isn't driven by open violence. The best example? Tywin and Olenna's conversation. They're discussing their family's futures, but the moment doubt creeps in, the mind games begin. Tywin shows his brilliance by threatening to put Loras Tyrell in the Kingsguard, preventing him from marrying and securing the Tyrell lineage. This forces Olenna to agree to his terms. These intelligent conflicts are some of the most entertaining aspects of the season. Scenes like these sharpen the writing, making Season 3 a masterclass in political warfare. Season 2 was action-oriented, but Season 3 takes a different approach, where war is fought less on the battlefield and more through politics. This shift is especially crucial for Robb Stark and Stannis Baratheon. If we talk about Stannis, then after his defeat at Blackwater, Stannis is desperate to prove himself again, but his increasing reliance on the Lord of Light only weakens him further. The contrast between Davos and Melisandre makes this storyline even more interesting. Stannis faces his biggest test when he must decide whether to sacrifice Gendry. This moment perfectly sets up three things. First, the internal conflict between Stannis, Davos, and Melisandre. Second, a moral challenge for Stannis. And third, a decision that could change the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. For Robb, the war slows down, not because he's losing, but because Tywin Lannister avoids direct confrontation. However, Robb still faces two major problems. First, tensions among his loyal bannermen, and second, breaking his marriage pact with House Frey. In my opinion, Robb's biggest mistake is failing to understand politics. By executing Rickard Karstark, he loses a significant portion of his own army. Then, by breaking his promise to the Freys, he destroys an essential alliance. The consequences were heartbreaking, but every character makes mistakes, and Robb followed his heart, and in Game of Thrones, that often leads to tragedy. In Season 2, Jon and Dany's storylines weren't the strongest, but now both get a new direction. For Daenerys, this season is the most satisfying yet. She finally proves herself as a powerful character, taking a huge step toward building her army. The scene where she wins over the Unsullied is not just epic and goosebump-inducing, but also the perfect payoff for 3 seasons of build-up. It's emotional and reinforces her true purpose, which is freeing people from oppression. This season also introduces some great characters into her circle, like Ser Barristan Selmy, a legendary Kingsguard who brings the experience of serving her father. Missandei, someone she forms a unique bond with and who becomes one of her most trusted advisors. Grey Worm, a strict yet deeply loyal warrior who brings a different kind of appeal. Daario Naharis, adding a layer of romantic tension to her story. With all these additions, Daenerys' journey now feels much more dynamic. For Jon Snow, Season 3 brings a major shift as he fully integrates with the Free Folk. But his storyline raises 3 key questions. Will his cover be blown? Will he start understanding their cause? Will he choose love with Ygritte or stay loyal to the Night's Watch? One of the best things about Game of Thrones is how it constantly challenges its characters. Jon was raised to believe wildlings are the enemy, but now he lives among them for an entire season, and even falls in love with one. This was crucial for his character development, shaping his future decisions regarding the wildlings. Meeting Mance Rayder in this season solidifies his inner conflict. Jon's arc from Season 3 to Season 5 was his best period, as he was constantly torn between duty and emotion. This struggle was foreshadowed by Maester Aemon's words, "Love is the death of duty."
Love is the death of duty.
In later seasons, when his character just only focused on fighting the Night King, he doesn't feel as compelling anymore. In Season 3, the Lannister family dynamics were at their peak, with brilliant tension between Tywin, Tyrion, and Cersei. One of the most impactful moments of the season is when Tywin completely breaks Tyrion down. For the first time, the always witty and confident Tyrion feels utterly powerless in front of his father. Cersei is also in a different position than before. With Tywin now in control, she can no longer dominate King's Landing politics like she used to. This shift even leads to an unexpected bond between Tyrion and Cersei, making their interactions far more interesting. If we talk about Jaime Lannister, then he is one of my favorite characters, and Season 3 marks the turning point in his journey. In Season 1, he was introduced as an arrogant, privileged warrior, which made sense because he literally pushed a kid out of a window. But remember how Game of Thrones makes us empathize with characters who face disadvantages, like Jon Snow being a bastard or Tyrion being a dwarf? Well, Jaime losing his hand forces him to redefine himself. For most of his life, he took pride in being one of Westeros' greatest warriors, but now he has to figure out who Jaime Lannister really is, other than that identity. One of my favorite scenes in the entire show is when Jaime finally reveals why he killed the Mad King. He did it to save thousands of lives, yet instead of being seen as a hero, he was labeled Kingslayer, and no one cared to hear his side of the story. Jaime's transformation from Oathbreaker to Oathkeeper is, in my opinion, the best character development in the entire show. When he loses his hand, he becomes a handicapped man in a brutal world, and suddenly, we feel more empathy for him than ever before. Now let's talk about the Red Wedding, which is the most heartbreaking scene in TV history. When Ned Stark was executed, we thought nothing could be more shocking. But then came the Red Wedding, one of the most devastating yet masterfully executed sequences in television history. Robb Stark's downfall was sealed the moment he broke his vow to marry Walder Frey's daughter. While Ned's death was shocking, at least it was acceptable. He was in enemy territory, surrounded by people who wanted him dead. But Robb's death was far more brutal because we believed he had a real chance at victory. But why the Red Wedding was so powerful? After Ned's execution, it felt like Robb would avenge his father, defeat Joffrey, and bring justice. But Game of Thrones shattered that expectation. The show had already proven that no one is truly safe, regardless of whether they are good or evil. But no one was ready for the level of betrayal in the Red Wedding. What makes this scene so impactful isn't just the betrayal itself, but the fact that it completely destroys everything Robb fought for. This was House Stark's darkest moment, wiping out their hopes of an independent North. Throughout Season 3, we saw Robb losing men, his position weakening, and just when it seemed like he might repair relations with Walder Frey, we were hit with something unimaginable. The moment the Reigns of Castamere starts playing, a deep sense of unease spreads. The audience slowly realizes something is terribly wrong, and then everything falls apart in an instant. Talisa is brutally stabbed multiple times. Robb is shot with arrows and left helpless. Catelyn, in sheer desperation, begs for her son's life, only to have her throat slit mercilessly. In this scene, Michelle Fairley's performance as Catelyn Stark was heart-wrenching, capturing the raw pain of a mother losing everything. It was more than just a shocking twist. The Red Wedding isn't just another plot twist. It's a storytelling masterpiece. Its brutality isn't just in the violence, but in the emotional destruction it leaves behind. With Robb's death, the North's dream of independence dies too, and the Boltons and Frey's betrayal was an earth-shattering moment for the audience. While most fantasy stories show heroes overcoming impossible odds, Game of Thrones is a world where victory belongs to those who master politics, betrayal, and power. The Red Wedding wasn't just a bold storytelling choice. It cemented Game of Thrones as a show unafraid to take high risks, delivering one of the most unforgettable moments in TV history. Season 3 struck a perfect balance between political drama, emotional depth, and character development. After this season, the show's popularity skyrocketed, proving that Game of Thrones was unlike anything else on television. Now, let's take a deep dive into Season 4 and understand why it's considered the best season of Game of Thrones. One of the show's biggest strengths is its multi-layered storytelling, where multiple storylines run simultaneously. However, this pattern broke in Seasons 7 and 8, where most storylines merged into a single main plot, making the show feel less dynamic. Season 4 excelled in this regard, featuring around 8 different storylines taking place in various locations. From the political conspiracies in King's Landing to the action-packed battles of the Night's Watch, this season struck a perfect balance. But it's not just about diversity. Season 4 is widely regarded as the peak of the show in terms of storytelling quality. So let's analyze some of its key storylines in detail. This season, Daenerys takes over Meereen with her unsullied army. This marks a turning point for her. She's no longer just a conqueror, but now a ruler as well. The brilliance of this subplot lies in how it doesn't stop at her victory. Instead, it explores the challenges of governance. Unlike Season 3, which focused more on Daenerys' rise, Season 4 strikes a better balance by showcasing the complications of leadership. If we talk about Jon Snow, then he gets some of his most memorable moments in this season. One of my favorite scenes is during the Battle of the Wall, when he finally sees Ygritte again. Even as she aims an arrow at him, he smiles at her. It's a beautiful moment that highlights their deep love for each other. But then, the tragic event we never wanted to see happens. Ollie kills Ygritte. Despite understanding that Ollie was avenging his parents, we can't help but hate him. That's the brilliance of Game of Thrones. It makes us care about characters to the point where we despise others, even if they aren't entirely wrong. Jon's emotional conflict between his love for Ygritte and his loyalty to the Night's Watch reaches its peak in this season. The Watchers on the Wall episode delivers an intense battle, and Jon's confrontation with Mance Rayder deepens his character. While Jon's arc later becomes somewhat flat, Season 4 portrays his moral dilemmas, leadership growth, and emotional struggles in the most impactful way. If we talk about Arya, then Season 4 also features one of Arya's most compelling phases, not as a full-fledged killer yet, but as a traveler with the Hound. Their dynamic becomes one of the best pairings in the show, blending humor, emotional depth, and Arya's character development. Through the Hound, she experiences the harsh realities of the world, shaping her into a strong survivor. In later seasons, Arya starts working alone, making her journey less engaging, but in Season 4, the Hound's presence adds to her growth. King's Landing has always been the political heart of the show, and Season 4 takes it to another level. The tension built in previous seasons reaches its peak, starting with Joffrey's shocking death. This event triggers a chain reaction. Like Cersei's hatred for Tyrion intensifies, Tyrion faces trial. Sansa finally escapes from King's Landing, Jaime struggles with his loyalty, and Tywin tries to maintain political control. Tyrion's trial is one of the most impactful moments in the entire show, especially his iconic speech.
I did not kill Joffrey, but I wish that I had. Watching your vicious bastard die gave me more relief than 1,000 lying whores.
This scene still gives me goosebumps. Even though we know the Tyrells were behind Joffrey's death, we want Tyrion to be proven innocent, yet we don't want the Tyrells to be exposed either. Then the trial by combat, Oberyn's shocking death, and Tyrion's escape. These are some of the show's most powerful moments. One of Season 4's greatest strengths is how it delivers its biggest twist early on. Unlike other seasons where major twists usually come in the finale, Joffrey's death in Episode 2 sets the entire season in motion, maintaining tension throughout. Most seasons either build up to a big climax or rush through it, but Season 4 stays balanced from start to finish. This season brings back the mystery and political scheming that made Season 1 so gripping. Back then, Jon Arryn's murder was the central mystery, leading Ned Stark into a dangerous investigation. Season 4 follows a similar approach with Joffrey's murder, turning King's Landing into a nest of conspiracies once again. A perfect example is Shay's betrayal during Tyrion's trial. It's a devastating moment that deepens the show's intrigue. By Season 4, the audience has developed strong attachments to the characters, making Joffrey's murder mystery even more compelling. Unlike Season 1, where viewers were still figuring out the world, this time, the show expects us to piece together the clues. The final confirmation comes in Season 7 when Lady Olenna reveals the truth. This moment is so satisfying because it connects back to the political game that reshaped the story in Season 4. Outside of King's Landing, the Vale also plays a major role in the season's intrigue. Littlefinger killing Lysa Arryn is a significant moment, pushing Sansa into the political game. With Joffrey and Lysa both dead, the season successfully recaptures the cutthroat political drama of early Game of Thrones. Most fans would agree that the first 4 seasons were pure Game of Thrones, where every character was playing their own game. Seasons 2, 3, and 4 felt like a high-stakes chess match where battles were happening, but the real focus was on the power struggles between characters and houses. But a great season isn't just about political intrigue, it also needs a strong villain. Season 4 delivers one of the show's best antagonists, Tywin Lannister. His presence commands every scene he's in. While Season 3 established his power, Season 4 fully utilizes it. Some of his best moments include his final showdown with Tyrion and his last conversation with Cersei. After Joffrey's death, Tywin essentially becomes the true king, even though Tommen sits on the throne. This is symbolized by the moment where he sits on the Iron Throne while ruling. His courtroom conflict with Tyrion is one of the most intense non-action climaxes in the show, filled with emotional weight and brilliant dialogue. Tywin was the ultimate power player. He orchestrated the Red Wedding and made the Lannisters untouchable. His wealth and intelligence made him nearly invincible, which is why his death, on the toilet, is one of the show's greatest ironies. Now let's look at how Season 4 sets up major changes for key characters. Like Tyrion kills his father, sending himself down a darker path. Daenerys locks up her dragons, beginning her downfall. Jon Snow endures his greatest loss and proves his bravery against Mance Rayder. Arya leaves the Hound to die, solidifying her strength. Cersei blackmails Tywin, bringing herself closer to power. Jaime frees Tyrion, unknowingly leading to Tywin's death. Bran embraces his destiny as the Three-Eyed Raven, and Sansa starts learning the game of politics from Littlefinger. These transformations made the characters more interesting. However, later seasons put some arcs, like Jon Snow's, on pause, making them feel stagnant. One of Season 4's greatest achievements is introducing Oberyn Martell. It's difficult to add a new fan-favorite character in an already packed season, but Oberyn fits in seamlessly. His personal vendetta is deeply tied to the main story, making him far more compelling than the Golden Company's dull introduction in Season 8. His charisma and tragic death make him one of the show's most unforgettable characters. After the first season set the foundation, Seasons 2, 3, and 4 elevated Game of Thrones to its peak. These seasons carefully developed the main characters, ensuring that every arc felt earned. Ultimately, Season 4 is a masterclass in storytelling, with its perfectly balanced subplots, strong character arcs, high-stakes drama, thrilling action, and intense political maneuvering solidified this season not only the best in Game of Thrones, but also one of the greatest seasons in television history. This was the era of Game of Thrones when it wasn't just a TV series, it had become a cultural phenomenon. It was a show that completely changed the standards of storytelling in television. From the Red Wedding to Oberyn versus the Mountain, from its emotional depth to its shocking twists, everything was sheer perfection. And that's exactly why people still consider it one of the greatest shows ever made. But as they say, what goes up must come down. For 4 seasons, Game of Thrones was a masterpiece. But what happened next that led it to one of the worst finales in TV history? What followed was both fascinating and, to be honest, completely shocking. Season 5 marked the beginning of a shift, not just on screen but also in the writing room. And this shift is what ultimately led to one of the biggest downfalls in television history. This change divided the Game of Thrones fandom into 2. The show's story didn't just turn into a tragedy in the script, it became one in real life too. But how did this downfall begin? Why did the show's quality start to decline? And how did Game of Thrones, once considered the greatest TV show ever, end up receiving so much backlash for its finale? All these questions will be answered in Part 2, where we'll dive into everything from Season 5 to its infamous final episode, the one the Game of Thrones fandom still hasn't forgiven. So stay tuned, because the real drama is just getting started.